what was your experience like discovering that you're highly sensitive?
Okay, so I'm trying to think when I first realized it. I'm not actually really sure where that is. I guess it's probably somewhere in between when I started learning my energy healing and yeah, I'm going to say it probably started there. I started learning how to do Reiki and energy healing, and then I realized how, at the very least, intuitive I was. And then I think on the highly sensitive part, it probably came a little bit later when I started learning about the attachment theory stuff, which I do in my coaching. So in that, they're talking about like hypersensitivities and hypervigilance and things there. And I was kind of like, this sounds like me. There's a lot of things that I take in a lot of the time in my life. And I'm like, that sounds like me.
Hmm.
So I think it was probably like a combination led up. It took a while for me to find that. But yeah, so it was only a few, like maybe 4 years ago that I actually really was like, I'm definitely a more sensitive human.
Hmm. Well, it sounds
Mhm.
like it makes sense since you are doing healing. I feel like a lot of us are sort of drawn to those types of jobs and things.
Yeah.
So I'm excited to talk about codependency because I think a lot of the listeners will be really interested in this topic. So, what does it mean to be codependent, and what might this look like in a relationship?
Okay. So I like to give an example of what codependency looks like, where it originated from. I guess the term actually comes more so from like alcoholics and people that are drug dependent and the relationships that they have in their lives there. But I think it very much falls over into insecure attachments and relationship styles too. So if you can imagine, someone that's an alcoholic and they keep messing up and they keep coming to the people that love and care about them to basically fix their problems. So, I can't afford rent, or I crashed my car and I need to, I'm going to need bail, or I need a lawyer, I need whatever. Um, People keep helping them in those ways and don't let them actually take accountability for the actions that they've taken. There is some sort of contract that's been made between the two of them that's not actually spoken about, but it's like someone in this dynamic needs to be the savior and then someone needs to be the victim. And the alcoholic or the drug dependent person is the victim, and the other person or people are being the savior, and they're it's this feeling of being needed, of wanting to be needed. And if I'm not consistently helping this person, then who am I? And they're not going to need me, so they're going to leave me. So it comes from this really unhealthy dynamic. And you can see this in like anxious and avoidant attachments, or like anyone that's kind of like a people pleaser can kind of come up in those same ways too. So it's obviously not as intense as a situation like that, but I feel like that can really put things into perspective. Like, are we enabling people by not actually asking them to step up and like communicate with us? Are we not, like, are we just doing stuff for people and not actually setting boundaries? And if we're kind of just like allowing things to happen all the time and being like, I'll just fix you. It'll be fine. I'll fix you. I got it. Then that's a codependent relationship.
Hmm. Wow. I feel like you're calling me out a little bit on like my past relationships with that one. I think a lot of people probably, I mean, a lot of people that are highly sensitive tend to be people pleasers, I think,
Yeah.
because we want to fix people, we want to be there for them. And so that can lead to some unhealthy relationships. I've definitely been there. That's hard to like get
Yeah.
out of that. So how can we, I guess, recognize or start to recognize this in maybe our relationships, and how can we start to heal those patterns that we have in our lives?
Mm. Well, I feel like if you kind of already resonate with some of the things that I've said, then you're kind of be like, oh, I guess there's something to look at here. But yeah, a lot of the like, okay, so if I'll speak specifically to healers to start off with, because you kind of like made a good point. So healers are coaches. I'd even say people that are in like nursing, police, ambulance, like paramedics, anywhere there. I think a lot of people again that want to help people in some way, there is something in there where it's like I want to be able to take control in some way by helping to fix people, to heal people. And it's just looking at, what's the actual reason that I need to do this? Is it because it's going to make me feel better? Or is it actually to help others? And a lot of people will say like, no, it's to help other people. But especially if we're looking at the people that are closest to us, and then we're saying like, it becomes this thing where it's like, they just need to do this so that everything will be better. And then if you like really hear what you're saying, it's like, my environment sucks and these people suck in the way that they're acting with me right now. And they just need to change so that we can have a better relationship. And that's actually coming from like a selfish place. It's just coming from a place of safety. Like I want something better. I want to be loved. I want to be safe, which comes from like a younger child version speaking through us, an unhealed version speaking through us. But it's ultimately not actually something that's, it's not something that actually is healthy. It serves, but it's not coming from a healthy place. And sorry, the second part of the question was how can they
How can we
heal?
start to heal these patterns? Yeah,
Yeah.
because I'm sure a lot of us, this has been a pattern
Mhm.
throughout our lives.
Yeah. So I feel like the basics for everything is just starting to one, like recognize the pattern. So if you're identifying some of the things that I'm saying in yourself, then that's a very good self-awareness thing. Being like, oh, okay, that doesn't feel good. That doesn't sound good. That does sound like me. And I think there's something unhealthy here. And so that's like a great first starting point, is just to be self-aware. Then I'd say explore more. Like this is the first time that you're hearing about it. Go and read about codependency, learn a little bit more that way, get some more information, and just like start to see, it's like there's XYZ things that I do, which I'm starting to recognize are not okay. And then the healing portion of it is basically like learning to create this intimacy with yourself. So how can I, like, what is it that I actually need? Do I need more emotional connection with people? Do I need to take more time for myself? Do I need to figure out what my passions are? Like, what is it that I actually need in my life that I'm hoping that people are giving to me and they're not, but I'm also not expressing it because I just didn't realize that I needed that thing in the first place. So I think needs are like a very good spot to start, is like we just need to start to understand ourselves and what it is that we want in our lives more before we can ask for it. Because if we don't know, we can't ask.
Hmm. And how can we start to know what our needs are?
Well, I think it's just starting to kind of listen. It's listening to your body a little bit and noticing in your life what things really start to light you up and what you enjoy and what you don't. So, like, are there certain people that you really enjoy being with? And then you can kind of like break it down and assess why. And usually you'll find that the people that you really like hanging out with are people that have similar interests, or they're very accepting. They really like to listen to you. They really like to support you, give back. Like there's going to be something there. So you just have to realize like what those things are and take those pieces and be like, okay, I want this. I want more of this in my life. And then then you can kind of see like, okay, and what people do I not like to, like I hang out with, but they don't usually leave me feeling very good. And then start to again, like kind of assess what is going on there. Why does that happen? And really getting intentional about what it is that you want, what it is that you don't like, what it is that you need in those ways. And then just in like whatever things that you're doing, like what are you passionate about? What actually, you're out on a really sunny day and you're saying, I really enjoy walking in the sunshine. Who knew? Like that would be a great thing for me to do. And just taking more time to do that. Or I really like to dance, or I really like to rock climb. Or I remember as a kid, I did this and I really seemed to love it. And kind of just like being able to take some inventory from the past and what you've enjoyed, and how you can bring more of that into your life now, or like other interests that you really want to explore. How can you start to move towards those things?
Mm. Do you have any tips for, so if somebody's listening and they're like, oh shoot, I can identify this exact relationship in my life, how, what do they do? You know what I mean? Like, how do they get out of this relationship if they decide to, or like
Mhm.
what do you do now that you know it's a codependent relationship and you feel like now what?
Mhm. Well, cool. Okay. So codependency is it, I don't want to say that they're necessarily relationships that you need to get out of, but it's a way of learning how to relate with each other in a different way. So if you're unaware of it, then yes, it's going to be innately unhealthy and continue in that way. But once you start to recognize what's going on and you start taking, like, basically, you have to start taking accountability for yourself first. So start to do the work on yourself, start to communicate with your partner or whatever relationship it is, because more. often than not, if we're codependent, like everyone around us is codependent with us in some way. So our friends, maybe not necessarily our coworkers, but they could be, but friends and family and romantic partners are very likely to. Like these are the people in our lives, are chosen people. So it's going to be like a problem with everyone. So it's about learning how to relate in a new way to those people. So, okay, I need to start to again learn what it is that I need. I need to start to communicate. I need this. This is a boundary around this. Like, I don't want to do that. You can call me in between these times, but I'm not going to answer. And then holding that boundary for yourself. And just like actually calling people forward too. So if you're the one that's the fixer and someone act like you actually need to get someone to do something for you, or like to hold up their end of the bargain, then like you have to let them do that thing. So it's like, I'm not going to tolerate you being late to this thing anymore. Like I need you to show up, and this is really important for me to this is a really important way for you to show support for me. I want you to show up. You've said that you were going to, and then you showed up late, and that doesn't make me feel good. And so like that's not okay. And this is something that needs to change, or XYZ kind of thing, right? Like if this keeps happening, I'm like, I don't know, I'm not going to want to be with you, or I'm not going to be able to trust you in doing these things, or whatever it is. But it doesn't have to be just cut it off completely. And realistically, people aren't going to be able to do that anyway if they're in a codependent relationship.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, it's just about like seeing if people are willing to work with you on it or not, because there's going to be resistance when you first start to change and heal, because people have been relating to you in that way for however long, and they know you as this person that will take care of them, do whatever for them, whatever that relationship looks like. So then when you start to change things, it's also calling them forward. So it's about seeing who's willing to change and step up with you and who's not. Because then if there's people that are not willing to change and they want to be taken care of and they're like upset with your growth, those are the people that you eventually will have to leave behind, because they're not going to feel good to hang out with anymore.
Right. Yeah, I work with
Mhm.
clients on setting boundaries too, and that's, I feel like, a key thing that I tell them is people are probably going to resist this at first
Mhm.
because that's not the version of you that they're used to. They're used to you responding in this type of way. So changing that is going to be like, what is happening? So I
Yeah.
think that's a really important thing for people to know.
Mhm. Yeah,
Yeah.
and you can kind of set it up too and say, I'm doing some work on whatever. Like I just started realizing that I'm not really very good with my boundaries. So I'm going to be starting to implement that, and I'm going to start setting boundaries with people. So just, don't be surprised when that happens.
Mhm.
And I
Yeah.
think that can kind of help. I don't think I've ever actually done that, but it was probably a conversation I could have had with a few people and it might have helped a bit.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I never really thought of that either, but I guess that would be helpful, especially for the right people who are
Mhm.
going to respect those boundaries, just to know that like I'm gonna change things up and
Yeah.
yeah, give them a little warning.
Yeah. And then I think like the other thing with some of that too is we're practicing our skills. Sometimes, often, it's going to be better to start practicing those things with people that aren't as important to us. So like those little everyday interactions that we have, and like someone wants to sell you something on the street and be like, no, I really don't want that. And actually actually using your voice and just saying no, versus being like, oh yeah, okay, sure, I'll waste like 15 minutes of my time that I didn't want to waste today, and just allowing it, and like people pleasing, right? So that's kind of like a simple example of showing them like, I just is not what I want to do with my life.
Yeah, that's a great example because it's so easy to get sucked into those things. They're like, it'll only
Yeah.
be a minute. Sure.
Yeah. 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 Mhm.
So, to sort of switch it up a little bit, we're going to go into talking about fear and intuition because I'm
Yeah.
really curious about this too. So, how can we discern fear from intuition, and then how does this relate to the nervous system?
Okay. So, okay, fear I find is like, this is, if we're connecting with like a spirituality side of things, fear is like the ego side of us speaking up. And I think of the ego as a few different ways, depends, I guess, on how it's showing up that day. But it can kind of like be this loud, obnoxious voice. It can be like our inner child speaking up and being scared about something and causing us to use our protective mechanisms in the world. So whether that's like basically it's like the fight, flight, freeze fawn response. So that can change, and that goes directly into the nervous system stuff. So if it's the ego is more that dysregulated nervous system state, so whether it's again fight or flight, or whether it's going down into something where it's actually like shutting down, those those situations are fear-based responses, our nervous system in dysregulation. And then intuition comes from a place where we're a lot more regulated. It's a lot quieter, and there's like there's no stories that for like, I don't know, for me it comes from, it's kind of like this dropping in or coming right from my body versus the fear coming like I know it's in my head. And sometimes it's just like there's so many things happening in my brain. I'm like, all these stories, all these things, all these options, all these like what could go wrong situations. So like that's kind of a way to decipher the difference, or otherwise it's just fear is very loud and obnoxious and intuition is very, very quiet. And sometimes it's kind of weird what comes through for intuition too. And you're like, I don't get what's happening here. Why are you saying, why are you saying this thing right now? But then you do the thing or you follow through whenever that intuitive hit was. And you're like, oh, okay, I get it now. That was great.
Mm. How can we get more in touch with our intuition? Like, especially if listening to this, we feel like, oh, a lot of what I'm experiencing is fear. How do
Mhm.
we kind of switch that?
So regulating the nervous system is one of the best ways to do that. And depending on what's actually happening in your body, there's different ways of doing that. So sometimes that is what a lot of people will say, like, go and take some time, sit with yourself, meditate, breathe, get quiet. But if we're too amped up and we're more in that fight or flight, those fight or flight options of dysregulation where our body's saying we need to move, we need to like hit, or we need to run, then we need to do something active. So basically, what we're just trying to make happen is we're trying to get ourselves present in the moment. So if we can do something that's very active that helps get like the adrenaline out of our body and bring us back into the moment, and down regulates that energy, then we can come back to like the sitting and getting present after we do some sort of activity. So again, I find a lot of people will more often than not, they already have some sort of routine of what they're going to do. So they recognize they're feeling anxious in some way and antsy. And so they'll go out for a walk, or they will go do a workout, or something's going to happen. Right. So a lot of times we can just trust our bodies to actually go through and do those, like go through the motions there. But yeah, some sort of movement to bring ourselves back down. And then if we're able to, then sit with ourselves. But sometimes just the movement in itself can be the thing that we need to down regulate. And sometimes it'll also bring emotion with it. So especially if we're mad or we're really scared about something, and then we go and like run or do some sort of hard workout, and there might be tears at the end of it once we're kind of able to again come down.
Yeah, I learned that I think in my like mid 20s because as a lot of us do, I had a lot of big feelings, especially growing up, and I would just sort of like be in them and not really know what to do. And then
Mhm.
when I was sort of like compelled to just go for like a fast walk when I was really mad this one time, and I remember I was like, wow, that helped so much. I wish I'd
Mhm.
known this for the past like 25 years or whatever. Because and then I just kept doing that every time, and it is amazing how much that can help to just move and just get that energy out.
Mhm. Yeah, and that even speaks to, again, like going back to understanding our own needs, is once we start to realize that something's really good for us, then make it a routine. So knowing that you felt a lot better after you did that walk, like we consistently are moving through some emotional stuff, and especially as women too, because we've got our cycles, and depending on where our hormones are at, we're like more antagonistic just before our period and our luteal phase and stuff, right? So like maybe make some more time to go and do walks in that point in time, in that like part of the cycle, right? And like that's another aspect of how of knowing ourselves. If you're a woman, go and learn about your cycle. It's very, very interesting. But yeah, just start to make something like that more consistent in your life so that you can just consistently regulate. Like I really like to dance and I like to walk and do yoga, any of those things. As long as I'm doing something like that, then it helps me with my own, with the body movement and the emotional regulation that I need to release.
Mhm. Well, is there anything that we haven't talked about yet that you wanted to make sure to talk about?
I think it's really important for people to get in tune with their bodies. I don't, I think that's one of the biggest pieces that people forget about or don't, I guess they don't realize how important it is. Like we've talked about a lot about the nervous system stuff now, but in in recognizing different things in the relationships, it's really important too. So, if we're in a codependent relationship where we're hanging out with those people that aren't as good for us, like what sensations am I actually feeling in my body in those moments in time, right? Like am I feeling nauseous? Am I starting to get a headache? Am I starting to just feel numb and I'm not present anymore? What's actually happening? So starting to notice things like that and trying to decipher what your body is trying to say to you, because we're going to start to be able to create that relationship with our body and learn quicker when we need to speak up for ourselves and say like something's off. If I'm disconnecting, maybe there's like too much emotional dumping happening right now, or maybe there's aggression happening and or like yelling or something or raised voices, and I need to ask them to stop with the raised voices, or I'm going to leave and we can talk about it later, or that's not okay, like stop yelling at me. Yeah, it's just a way of being able to assess like when we have to speak up for ourselves too. So we need to create that intimacy with our bodies also to be able to have those other relationships. And that also comes like I work on the side of like intimacy and sexuality too. So especially when it comes to like that side of the relationship, we really need to start to listen to our bodies too. Like I got this whole talk basically about understanding what self consent is. And are we allowing things? Are we people pleasing in the bedroom as well? And actually like violating our own consent with things that don't feel good for us and that we don't want in the first place, but we think that our partner wants. And what is that actually doing to our body? Is it causing us to start to dissociate and disconnect, and then we're not actually getting the pleasure we need, and all of that stuff? So it's really, really important for us to start to notice what is happening in our body in all the different aspects of our relationships.
Yeah. And I feel like that's something that's being talked about more, or maybe it's just the people that I'm connecting with that are all
Mhm.
like we're all on the same page. But it's too bad that I feel like this is something you should learn as you grow up to check in with your body, listen
Mhm.
to your body, not just I feel like I was always in my thoughts
Mhm.
growing up and in my emotions and not really noticing physically how I was feeling. And so learning how to do that has made a huge change. I mean, especially in my relationships, to be able to notice my needs and start setting boundaries and things. So I think, especially for highly sensitive people, we absorb so much that we
Mhm.
really, especially need to check in with our bodies to make sure that we're doing okay and that the situation is, we're feeling okay in the situation, or if we need to take a couple minutes or whatever it may be.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's just about like, I think with highly sensitive people in general, that communication and knowing ourselves and setting those boundaries just becomes like so much more important. So even recognizing, am I okay? What's my timeline? Like how long can I actually be out in public for without shutting down or feeling overwhelmed or like getting really tired and then not wanting to talk to anyone? And I just end up in a corner alone because I need to just go home at this point, right? Like I've got a
Yes.
2 hour limit usually is mine. I recognize that. And so, be able to think about that and be like, hey, what's my timeline? What can I do? And again, like do different times in your cycle actually affect when you want to be out and be social with people, or when you're going to be like bitchier and you just shouldn't people and you need to take care of yourself more and do more of those walks or whatever that looks like, right? So, or yeah, and just like say yes or no to certain events and whatever else, and finding the support you need. So it's just very important to be able to communicate well, basically for everyone, but especially for highly sensitive people, because since we are so sensitive, we have to be very protective and we have to be able to speak up for that.
Yes. Yes, definitely.
Mhm.
So how can people connect with you?
So I've got my website, which is Shelby Avann with two N's, .ca. And then if they want, they can come and like check out my Instagram too. It's kind of more personal than it is business. I talk about everything on there anyway, but it's Intimacy Mistress. So you will see some of the, actually, you'll see a lot of the stuff that I'm doing on the daily there. So if I do have new offerings and stuff, they'll be there. But if you're actually serious about working with me, then website would be best. And I do have my online coaching, one-on-one programs. I may have some group coaching programs coming up. I'm not sure yet. One-on-one for sure is there. And then I've got some women's circles that I'm doing in person in the Toronto and outer areas.
Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Well, thank you so much for being here. And this is, I don't think anybody's really talked about these topics on the podcast before. So this was great.
Okay. Thank you. I'm glad that I could share some things that haven't been talked about here yet.